so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Bloomerang Academy. This is Ron Newland, your instructor for today's session, which is entitled Documenting Your Own Custom Development Plan. This is a class we've been offering about twice a year for a couple of years now here at Bloomerang. And it's really not teaching you how to create a development plan. It's much more just the types of questions that we would ask you as we're trying to get an understanding of how your fundraising goes, to get kind of into a spreadsheet or a calendar what the things are that you're already doing, and try to get them kind of custom, documented, itemized, and in a format where it's useful for us to understand how we can help you best, and frankly, sometimes for your own internal audiences, including your board, to understand what all you're involved with. And I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the resources that are available in Bloomerang. If you click on the tab up here that says Resources, and again, these are available to anybody. This is where you can go to see a number of our educational white papers that are available. Different subject matter topics that you can download and read on donor retention, major gift fundraising, marketing and communications, year-end giving, and some of the materials that we've published. You can also, under Resources, look at a great number of templates. So, for instance, for doing board development, sample bylaws, board operations policies, nominating committee job description, a board member performance expectation worksheet, different topics in terms of a template for a gift acceptance policy. Here's the development plan template that we're going to be using today. I'll be emailing this to you, but if you wanted to just click on it here, you would be able to also just type in your email. If you lose your email today, you can come back to Bloomerang and click on Sample Development Plan Template and download it here. Some really cool things like a gift range chart calculator for those of you who have, or maybe been interested in doing a capital campaign. If you've ever done a capital campaign, you know that you don't raise $1 million with $1,000 gifts. You're going to get a small number of big gifts and a much larger number of smaller gifts. And this is a way for you to say, if you're doing like a $5 million campaign, what would be one reasonable expectation of how to get that? Type in $5 million, calculate. You might want one gift of $1.25 million and one gift of $750,000. Each of those gifts requiring 5 prospects, because not everybody is going to say yes, but some of the people that say no to this gift may say yes to one of these. And you'll see that how many total gifts in each of these ranges it might be required to raise $5 million in a capital campaign. Just a handy little tools there. The pledge card templates, etc. So just all kinds of things here that are available, not just to Bloomerang customers, but even people who are not yet Bloomerang customers. Some of the resources that we make available. But what we're going to talk about today is a couple of resources that I use in my role as database consultant here. They're adapted from some things that I used when I was a self-employed fundraising consultant before joining Bloomerang, updated and customized with some things that Bloomerang has used. What we're going to do here is go through a questionnaire, and as we answer the questions in it, we're going to fill in a calendar that is essentially, some of you have been doing project management for years and years might recognize as a Gantt chart. So I'm going to open up right now the empty template that I'm going to be sending you later today that we're going to fill out as we go through today's session. And essentially what we have here is just a simple Excel spreadsheet with 78 rows, one for each week of a year and a half long time period, starting in January, for in this case, January of 2019, running through all of 2019, and then the first 6 months of 2020. And these are the reason we do that. We're doing this class in February of 2019 to try to talk, hopefully talking to some of you who are starting a new fiscal year this coming June. And so we want to be able to have the questions that we're asking here have spaces to fill them in all through your next fiscal year. So when we start out, and so those are the rows. The columns are the governance tasks that are going to take up your executive director's time and affect your board. Communications tasks, which are going to be driven by governance tasks and development tasks and program tasks, which aren't shown here. And the tasks that are going to be driving the calendar and the to-do list for your development department. And many of you, the same person is doing at least two of these, if not all three. And if that's the case, then this chart may be even more important to you than for those of you who have three different people heading up, either doing or heading up departments that are doing all three of these. So, as we start this questionnaire out, these are the types of questions that I would ask when I was getting to know an organization's what an organization was always doing, or was already doing, in my attempts to get an understanding of what their calendar was like, and then hopefully maybe kind of coach them through getting some things actually down on paper. Not that they didn't know all these things already, but sometimes a customer just hasn't actually laid them out in this way. So the first question I like to ask, and so there are only a couple of things that are true of every nonprofit in the country in terms of what happens to them on an annual basis. And one is, regardless of when your fiscal year ends, you're all going to be doing certain things based on the calendar year for tax purposes. So, as a development task, you're all going to sometime around late January, early February, going to be preparing your tax receipts for your donors who gave $250 or more in the previous year. That's a development task. At the same time, your administrative team, not the executive director himself or herself, but certainly the other people in the C-suite are going to be doing administrative tasks in terms of preparing your staff members' W-2s, their income tax statements, and your contractors' 1099s, which are their equivalents of tax statements. Then my calendar is pretty blank all the way down until a couple of things that happen for everybody in late November, early December. And these are under my development task column. Giving Tuesday is the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. It's something that's growing 50 to 100% a year for the last 5 or 6 years. After Thanksgiving, Friday is Black Friday at the bricks and mortar stores, and Monday is Cyber Monday online. And then Tuesday is, the nonprofit world has been trying to establish as Giving Tuesday, where tons and tons of nonprofits are going to be working really hard to promote through their donors' emails and through their donors' social networks the idea of making a charitable gift on that day. So if you're doing that, that means you're probably going to be spending a fair amount of time, a couple of weeks before, getting ready for that, writing your materials, testing your websites, testing your forms, etc. If you're not doing it, then you want to make sure this is on your calendar so you don't do something else that day that gets absolutely lost in the sweep of things. The other thing that's probably important for most organizations, this isn't as common today as it used to be, or it's not as universal today as it used to be, but I always ask, is your organization a United Way agency? Maybe only a quarter of Bloomerang customers are United Way agencies, but it's important to know whether you are one or not when the United Way blackout period in your community is. It used to be almost universally November 15th. Almost everywhere, the United Ways were doing their corporate campaigns soliciting payroll deduction contributions in the fall, and United Way agencies all agreed to not compete with the United Way while that was going on up until, say, November 15th, at which point then, only then, could United Way agencies be doing all of their direct mail campaigns. So, if you are a United Way agency, that's your direct mail campaign is going out no earlier, typically, than November 15th. And if you are not a United Way agency, then you may really want to be thinking hard about being ready to do your direct mail campaign just before November 15th. Get your solicitations into people's mailboxes before all the United Way agencies do. Again, you've got to check and make sure that your community is still on this timetable. But regardless, whether you're thinking of the United Way is a consideration for you you or not, then year-end appeals and gift entry are going to be things that are going to be taking up your development department's time for the rest of the calendar year. How are we doing here? Okay. So those are things that are on everybody's calendar. Everything else is pretty much going to be specific to your organization. So if I was sitting down with you and saying, okay, let's spend 40 minutes together, and I'm going to ask you some questions so I can get a really good understanding of how you raise your money. But these are the questions I'm going to ask in this order. First, when is your fiscal year end? Now, I would say about 60% of Bloomerang customers, it's probably 60% of nonprofits in general, have a June 30th fiscal year end. I would say maybe 30% of our customers are on a calendar year, and maybe 10% are somewhere else, usually the end of the first quarter or the third quarter, a handful on something even other than that. But I always like to know when the first fiscal year end is, and get that on the calendar, because that's going to drive a whole lot of other things for you. So the next question after that, and that is actually actually something that typically doesn't affect your development calendar. Your donors don't really know or care um, when your fiscal year end, other than perhaps you may be, if you're on a fiscal year end, then your development team and your communications team is probably working on an annual report that is going to be distributed sometime after the end of July through the month of August, maybe early September at the latest. And it will list, it'll list all of your donors through the previous fiscal year. But normally, the next question I like to know is, okay, if this is your fiscal year end, so does that mean when do your new board members start? Or is your fiscal year the same as a board year? In most organizations, that's the case. So I would mark here that this is when the 1st of July is when new board members start. All right, that's good. That probably means that you had some board meetings sometime in the spring, and that probably means that you had sometime in the late spring was when your new slate or was finalized, whether that's a slate that gets voted up or down, or whether that's a ballot where 6 people are elected and 4 people get thanked for their for applying but don't get elected. There's sometime in the spring is when you're doing your board recruitment, and that's where I like to ask, okay, do you have a written board job description? If not, well, go to Bloomerang's resources page, and you can download a template and you can customize it to your own needs. Or you can just Google board member job description. You'll get all kinds of boilerplate job descriptions that you can tweak a little bit. They're all going to say similar things about financial responsibility and giving and getting. But there are some things specific to your organization that I would like to recommend. If you don't have a job description yet, go get one. That's easy. And then go develop a document that I'm going to show you over here on the right-hand side of the page that is that's a supplementary document. You're talking to a new board member. They're going to ask you what is expected of them. They know that every board expects them to give and to get. But when and how much? Well, this is where I would like to walk you through a series of questions that should correspond to, in Bloomerang, what would be your appeals. What are the, I would recommend that you have a document that you can hand to proposed board members that shows them everything that you're doing that raises money, which ones they might be kind of expected to participate in, and at what level, and also shows them which ones they would be able to use as opportunities to ask other people for money. So, your list of unrestricted funds, and at this point, I'm going to start giving you answers based on the organization where I learned all this, the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame 25 years ago, my first experience as an executive director. And since this is where I learned all this, it's all kind of seared into my memory, so I can remember it all. But essentially, we could say that, so the different ways we have for soliciting funds, and that could be entered into a database under an appeal, is we have membership. We're going to do a year-end appeal. We didn't do until very late in my time there a separate spring appeal. We had a variety of different. Okay, wait a second. I'm missing one here. We had a variety of different ways for unsolicited gifts to come in. Actually, when I was there, we didn't. Yeah, I was there before the internet existed, so we did not have an online gift form then, but we do now. They do now. But we did a quarterly magazine that had an envelope response vehicle in it. Sometimes we would receive contributions along with purchases of merchandise. And then we had a series of special events. But we also had a major gift club. So it was kind of an expectation at the start of each board year that we would start each board year and fiscal year with doing solicitation of our existing donors with three levels of giving: $1,000 level, a $500 level, and a $250 level. And there was an expectation that a board member would do one of these. No expectation that you had to give $1,000, but that one of these levels would be, you commit to that at the start of your term. This also then became something not only that you would give at, but something else that you could ask others to do. Similarly, so let's say somebody might decide, I'm going to give $500, and I can ask other people to give at one of those levels. Now, if you're going to give $500, we're not going to demand that you give $30 for a membership pass so you can get in the front door for free. That's going to come with your $500 contribution. But that's a good thing for you to ask others to do, so we'll put an X there as a way that a board member could help raise money from other people. The year-end appeal and the spring appeal are things pretty much done by the staff. We may have some people look at a mailing list and countersign some letters, but by and large, these aren't things that board members are asked to contribute to. Neither are online gifts or the envelope in the newsletter, but we did special events in the course of the year. So our biggest special event was the annual induction banquet, where new inductees were entered into the Hall of Fame, and you might be asked to buy. And the expectation here was that unless you were out of town on spring break or your daughter's wedding, that you would at least be buying a couple of tickets, if not buying a table for this event. And we actually sold, a lot of big revenue provider here was an annual program where we printed and sold congratulatory ads for the new inductees. And so, it's kind of an expectation you might want to do that too. Silent auction's not necessary. We also then had a golf tournament where you do the same, sort of the same expectation that you would either, at least you would register to play as an individual if you didn't bring a foursome, and you might be a whole sponsor or something like that. And then we had a third special event in the year, which was a holiday tournament, a basketball tournament of high school teams played between Christmas and New Year's. That doesn't really a charitable contribution. It's more earned income. But kind of an expectation as a board member that unless you're out of town, that's something that you're probably going to you're probably going to attend, even if it's only you and your spouse or a child, $20. But that's something that you could bring somebody to, just as the golf tournament is something you can bring someone to, just as the annual induction ceremony would be something that you could bring something to. So a document like this helps a prospective board member not only understand that the expectation of them as a donor might be somewhere between $250, $290, maybe $400 at the low end, maybe $2,000 at the high end, in terms of what are the things that are going to be expected of me financially. And also, if you're going to ask me to raise money, what are my opportunities to do that? And so, and it's also just a nice thing to be able to show board members as they're coming on board that their donations aren't the only thing running your organization. To be able to show prospective board members, we are working 365 days a year doing all these things. So that's kind of a good thing to have. At this process in the time of year, we're talking today in February to people who are thinking about recruiting new board members in the next 2 months. And so this would be a good thing for you to kind of put on your plate to have handy as you go through that process. I'm sorry, Anne Marie. It seems like we've got, you're not the only person with that problem. I hope everyone is having that problem, but we've got several people describing that. Hopefully, the audio or the recording that I'll send a link out to afterwards will be better than what actually was over the phone. So, the next question I'd like to ask after that is, all right, so if you are recruiting new board members to start on the first of a new year, that probably means, and then, so my next question is, so I assume you've got some sort of annual meeting. Well, yeah, typically anybody who is having new board members start in July 1st has some sort of annual meeting in the middle of June. Your bylaws are going to probably specify who gets to attend and vote at that annual meeting. And lots of organizations' bylaws specify that some organizations' bylaws will specify that their board is elected by the preceding board. But many, many organizations have bylaws that say that the board is elected at a meeting of the members, with member defined as anybody who gave above X dollars in the previous year, which means that your annual meeting, it is a governance task, becomes something where about a month before that, you've got a communications task where the annual meeting invitation must be mailed. Very few organizations that I've seen have updated their bylaws to talk about electronic invitations. Lots and lots of organizations still out there working under bylaws written in the 50s that talk about direct first-class mail. So the other thing that's going on this time of year is, if you're getting ready as a executive director or a development director assisting your executive director, oops, I don't want to shrink that much. Is that somewhere around the same time that the slate is being finalized is when you're going to either get a commitment that your current president, your current board chair is going to serve again, or the new board chair is identified, and start right after the slate is finalized working on committee chairs. Now, this is a really crucial thing for an effective board. If you are, a healthy organization, officially the board chair in almost every case is the person who asks people to chair committees. But any healthy organization, the board chair and the director or the CEO are going to work together to do that. If you've got a board chair who's a control freak that doesn't want to involve the CEO in that conversation, you've probably got a problem with the organization. Similarly, the CEO or president or director of the organization is not necessarily obligated to ask members of the staff to participate in the identification of board committee chairs. But certainly the similarly, just as you'd want your board chair to let your executive director um, weigh in on committee chairs, the CEO similarly would, you'd want that CEO to get the development director or the vice president for advancements buy-in, if not outright advice, on who should be the next development committee chair. While having these conversations, this is also the time to talk to your incoming board chair about your board calendar. How many board meetings are going to be scheduled next year before you finalize the board slate? Maybe even, if you can even have this conversation just enough earlier that you're able to incorporate this into your board job description. If you are working for an organization that has monthly board meetings and it is February and you're looking at doing these things in the next couple of months, I would urge you, this is the time of year to sit down and have a conversation with your board chair and get their buy-in on having the board agree on a calendar for next year where they maybe only meet every other month. And if that's something that's new for your board, because board meetings, unless you're an all-volunteer organization, and the volunteers at their monthly board meeting, that's the only time people talk to each other. Monthly board meetings, I think, absolutely drain a staff. And so I really recommend organizations, if you can't get all the way to quarterly board meetings, at least you go to every other month board meetings with a plan for filling in the time in between with either committee meetings or some other types of activities, so you can tell your board chair, oh, don't worry, I'm going to keep those guys busy. So for instance, when I was with the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame, our calendar developed rather quickly into a situation where we had our annual meeting of the entire membership in June. Then we did not have a board meeting in July, but what we had was our golf tournament. And in fact, we didn't have a board meeting in August. Now, what we had was a picnic. Sounds goofy, sounds silly. Actually, it was a manly man event at a yacht club with barbecue, etc. What this was, I put it in the development column because what it becomes is a cultivation opportunity for major gift fundraising. So we'd have a board meeting about the third week of September. Nothing in October other than the committee that named the new inductees met that month. Then we'd have a meeting in November, which is where the board would essentially sign off on the new inductees. We didn't have a board meeting in December. December's a terrible time for board meetings. However, we had our next major fundraising event of the year. Not really a fundraising event as much as a earned income event, a holiday basketball tournament. Again, this wasn't something that raised a lot of major gifts, although we would get sponsors for hospitality rooms and sell ads in a program. But by and large, this was people buying $10 tickets. But it was an opportunity for board members to come, show up, pay $20, bring 4 friends, and have them pay something to get involved in the organization. Then we went into January, where we would have a board meeting. 2 in a row. We'd have another one in February. No board meeting in March because that was when we had our third major event of the year, of the calendar year, the annual induction banquet where new members were inducted, and then we would have one in April, at which time next year's budget and board slate needed to be ready. And then our annual meeting for the next year. So, ended up with 6 board meetings and committee meetings or fundraising special events or cultivation opportunities in between. So similarly, one more thing before we get done with this column is the budget. So essentially, backing up here, April of this year was a board meeting. February of this year was a board meeting. This April board meeting is when I would have had to have had budget prepared. And a slate, and which means that an executive director is probably working 10 and 12 hours a week for the previous 3 weeks on budget prep. I'll mark all those in and kind of color it. So what we're starting to see here is a executive director's calendar starting to get a little bit of full. It showed you how the annual banquet comes in March next year. Obviously, it's also March of this year. So here's where then I would ask, if I hadn't asked already, about your United Way agency. Are you or are you not? Depending on where you are, and I would recommend for most organizations, particularly if you're in a mid-sized community where the United Way campaign is a sizable portion of what a lot of people are thinking about, that you do you get your solicitation out before the blackout period, which would mean that your year-end appeal, starting at about the middle of October, your development department, just as getting a budget prepared, is going to not take up all of an executive director's time for 3 weeks. But it's going to be 10 to 12 hours a week. Same thing happens with your year-end appeal. I'm going to mark all of this in orange. The whole idea, this is one of the great things that Bloomerang one of the most important things that Bloomerang does for you, is allows you to prepare a mailing to everybody in your database at the end of the year, where you customize the letter based on the records that Bloomerang keeps for those people. So you can send one letter to your first-time donors, and another letter to your recurring donors, and yet a third letter to your lapsed donors, etc. And a fourth letter to people who have been coming to your events but have not yet made a gift. And customize those letters. Even customize the ask in them based on perhaps their average gift in the past, or their largest gift in the past, etc. So these things are what's happening in your development calendar now for almost every organization that's going to do a year-end appeal. And then we start talking about those other special events, which, again, I talked about these while talking about the board calendar. Now, typically what these things are going to involve is not only they're going to have some fundraising goals attached to them and fundraising deadlines attached to them, but very importantly, they're going to have communications tasks attached to them. So if I were to go all the way, well, let's start with our biggest fundraiser, which was that basketball, that awards banquet. In November, the board meeting is going to sign off on the new inductees, which means that a week after that, under my communications column, I'm going to have to do press releases for these inductees. And that's going to get, and then after that goes out, I've got until about the middle of January, before the January board meeting, to create the collateral for the banquet. What that means is ticket order forms, the forms by which people would lay out and order a commemorative ad. These things have to be mailed to everybody in our database that has ever bought tickets or bought an ad to honor people in the past, and also handed out to board members at this meeting, because this is one of the board members' greatest opportunities for doing fundraising for the organization, is to sell 2, 3, 4 tables worth of people, worth of tickets to that event. And that's why we had board meetings 2 months in a row, was so we could monitor our progress toward that. Then that banquet coming up in middle of March meant that under fundraising column, I had a deadline here for all sponsorships and for all those program ads. I had to have the program to the printer early the previous week to give it 10 days to be ready. So that's a communications task for the banquet. Scroll back up to the previous year where we have a golf tournament that happens in July. We're going to have the same things happening there. I'm going to have deadlines for the signage for my whole sponsors. But more importantly, I'm going to have had materials out a good 4 weeks in advance. Sometimes we were able to stick a golf tournament invitation into the annual meeting invitation, but these aren't the same mailing lists. You can't just do it with, the annual meeting invitation is specifically for people who gave, whereas the golf tournament we want to send to all kinds of people who haven't given yet, right? So these are typically, sometimes you can merge part of it, but it's a separate mailing. What we're doing here is we're starting to fill in this calendar of communication tasks, and we're back here again then to this year with the banquet ad deadline, etc. As we scroll on down here, the other thing, the holiday basketball tournament, and obviously, that kind of takes care of itself, but you're going to need to do press releases. And you're going to have to have an ad deadline for, again, for a printed program, which is the week before Christmas. I hated Christmas. I hated December in this job. It really was a mess. So, but what kind of what we work our way through here then is now that you're starting to get onto your calendar, I actually kind of forgot something altogether. So we had new board members starting in July, which is when our major gift, our gift club solicitation started. And we tried to wrap that up before the year-end appeal to everybody went out. So this is where we start with new board members starting in July. They show up at an annual meeting to be, and they get their board packets. And a lot of them are going to bring their check for that, as we talked about up here, for that $1,000 or $500 or $250 contribution at that time. And this is where the process begins of working through our board, our advisory board, our former inductees, and our nominees to ask them, and anybody who's given $250 or more in the past. This all is going on all through the fall. And that's why this picnic in here, which sounds like a silly thing to do, becomes a really important thing on the calendar. Because if you've got board members who said, yeah, I'd love to be on the board, and absolutely I think I can, in addition to my own giving, I can help you raise a couple $1,000. Well, here's a really good opportunity there for them to bring 3 or 4 friends to an event where they can eat some barbecue and sit on a pontoon boat with the president of the Pacers and then kind of feel good about being asked for $250 or $500. So these, we're starting to fill. We're getting more and more of an annual calendar filled in here. I like to go from there into your, an overall communications plan that is not related specifically to your special events. Now, when I was running both the Basketball Hall of Fame and later the Indiana State Museum Foundation, I thought it was really important for statewide organizations to have a communication. When you're a museum and a lot of your constituency is more than a half an hour away, it's important to communicate with them. And so we did a quarterly membership magazine. And we were able to create that magazine with an editorial calendar that kind of wrote itself. So, for instance, I'm going to scroll down here. So, the board meeting in November was when new inductees were approved, and then right after that, announced with a press release. Then all this time that we're running a basketball tournament, we're also collecting the newspaper articles that are the local coverage of those inductees' stories. And we're just going to assemble a magazine by getting permission to rewrite, to republish those articles. So we'll write that magazine in early January. We will print the magazine in late January, and we will mail the magazine at the end of January, full of stories about the upcoming induction and full of response vehicles for buying tickets and buying ads. Ta-da! So then we have the banquet itself in late May. So early April, we kind of have the same thing. We can write a magazine, a large part of which consists of just publishing the scripts of the inductees' awards speeches. And once again, mail a magazine with a invitation to the golf tournament. Sometimes midsummer we had some flexibility. Sometimes that was the hardest one to write. That wasn't the hardest one to write, but it didn't write itself. It was the one where there was not necessarily something on the calendar that lent itself to a magazine, and so we just tell great stories. But again, we've got this board, this calendar coming up where the fall board meeting is the first board meeting of a new year, and it's the last opportunity to nominate somebody for the Hall of Fame, because then the induction committee meeting takes place in October, and the board signs off on. So right around here in the 1st of October, I'm writing a magazine which is all the stories of the new nominees, printing it in mid-October, mailing it in late October with info about the basketball tournament, which is coming up in 2 months. So what this is doing is, when I ask people, tell me what you're doing, okay, let me write this in, what this normally ends up doing is telling me that they're doing more than they actually sometimes think they are, and it's helping me identify for them when there are opportunities to do something else, or when they're all ready to chock full to try anything else. It's also really often giving them a really good tool for telling their own board members, this is what we're doing. A lot of board members, frankly, have a tendency to believe that nonprofit organizations don't work as hard as for-profit organizations, and sometimes it's really hard for them to believe just absolutely how hard nonprofits do work. But the other thing that this allows us to do, and these are the kind of the final things on here, is all right, now that we've got this, let's look at what are the times in your year that would be good for doing other things. So this is an organization that's already got 3 special events. I actually think 2 is plenty. 3 special events is too many. If you've got 3 special events, I wouldn't recommend you do a 4th. But what are some of the other things you could do? Would it behoove this organization to do a spring appeal in addition to a fall appeal? And maybe even, since we're so busy right here, and they've got thank you letters and stuff to do, maybe this goes out like April 30th. Or, when would be good times a year to do a database cleanup? And I would say that early June looks like would be good, or early September. Good opportunity to print out your whole database, look for duplicates, look for misspelled names, run a national change address service, and you got really big news coming from Bloomerang really soon on how we're going to help you do that for next to nothing. But it's a really good opportunity to to make sure that people who have moved since the last time you mailed to them, you've got their new address and you're not wasting postage. Put these things in your timetable based not on me saying do it in May, but based on you looking at your own calendar and saying, when do I have a couple weeks when I'm not already buried? Okay, so that is essentially the questions that I walk through a new client with, and kind of educate myself on what they're already doing, and in many cases kind of give them a useful tool in terms of seeing what things they just take for granted and don't ever actually write down, which can be useful as an internal communication tool with their own staff and with their board in terms of saying, this is our calendar, this is our development plan. I will be sending you an email later today with both the questionnaire that I walked through and this spreadsheet completed, plus this spreadsheet still empty, so you can kind of look at what we did here and fill it out for yourselves. Thanks so much for being part of Bloomerang Academy. Email me at ron.newland@bloomerang.co if you have other questions, and have a great week. Thanks.